First of all, introducing myself and the other teammates I have from the Circular Innovation Council. I'm the Executive Director of CIC, and I have with me today supporting this webinar Caitlin Perry, who's in charge of our education and engagement programming, as well as Alicia, who is hands on the controls of all of our communications, as well as the mechanics of this webinar as well. So thanks very much to the two of them for all of the support. Very excited to bring this much anticipated webinar that we've been working on for some time with our partnership, the Canadian Standards Association Group, Regenerative Agriculture in Canada, a growing conversation and growing practice. And today we're going to be talking about groundbreaking introductory research that CSA has commissioned that is going to be used to inform an upcoming national standard to accelerate circular food systems and in particular support more regenerative agriculture practices in the Canadian context. So with that in mind, go through a bit of an agenda but before that, would like to take a moment to provide a land acknowledgement. We are hosting this webinar today on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples that is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. To find out what land you are joining us from today, please visit .ca. So just want to start by going through the agenda and how we're going to unpack the 90 minutes that we've welcomed you to join us today. We're going to start out by giving you a little bit of background on the Circular Innovation Council if you're not aware of our organization or our works. See many members joining us today and lots of future members. So want to just start out by giving you a little window into the areas that Circular Innovation Council is currently focused on. And then we're going to dive right in, starting with Catherine Tays from the CSA Group, who's going to talk about standards in general, their organization, and all of the good works that they're currently undertaking connected to the circular economy and how positively they are affecting Canada's transition. And in particular, their groundbreaking work around regenerative agriculture and the upcoming standard that they're working on. We're going to turn it over to Sudaf from the Ivey Business School, who's going to be presenting the framework research that really underpinned and will be spoken to very directly as it relates to the development of the standard itself. We'll go take a little bit of time to pose a few questions. So that's when you as delegates will have the opportunity to chime in. And then we're going to open it up to stakeholders from different aspects of the agriculture ecosystem, get their take on the standard and what it means to them and their work. And then we'll have a bit of time then to really open up Q&A between them and amongst you as well. And then we'll wrap up. So we encourage people to use the Q&A function. If you're not familiar, scroll down to the bottom of your screen. You should find the Q&A function there. Please drop in your questions as they come to you. We do have Caitlin on our team that will be curating them for me and then unmiking and voicing them for you. And then that way we can keep the conversations flowing as well. I should say that we did call out to all of you who have registered to provide your questions ahead of time. A special thank you to those that took the time to do so. It really helps us frame the discussion and make sure that we get to the heart of what is of interest to you. And then just administrative housekeeping. This session will be recorded and posted for you. And also the slides will be sent to all of the registrants who have participated today as well. And then, of course, we want to just mention that if this is not only this work is not only led by CSA, but in fact are a very key partner of CIC in this work and other as well. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So if you've not heard of the Circular Innovation Council, we're a national non-for-profit organization working to reshape Canada's current linear economic model into a circular one, and we've been doing so for the better part of 5 years now. We've established a membership of over 200 organizations that really span the diversity of the ecosystem from the private sector all sizes and shapes and types of business community, as well as all three levels of governments, academia, consultants who works in the area as well, and the general public, education institutions as well. And really what we're aiming to do is work in our three pillars of action. We are an important policy and advocacy organization looking at creating government interventions or government policies that help us reshape the markets we're looking for that can deliver on those circular products and services. We develop a lot of resources, research, and services to try to inform that policy and advocacy as well. And then we're very much known for our programs, pilot projects, and partnerships. And this is about trying to understand where the barriers are to circularity, integrating and co-developing a lot of market-based pilots, which tell us where systems are persisting in a linear fashion, and then what is needed to actually create circular interventions. So this is the works that we're known from. Some of the logos at the bottom of the slide here tell you the diversity of projects and programs that we work in. We are an open source organization. All of the works that we undertake are open sourced for any organization or individual who wants to learn from them. And we do encourage you to take a look at our membership and certainly get involved in the organization. Next slide, please. Here's just a little a snapshot of the diversity of members who join our organization. We work with all of our members very, very closely. And of course, as you know, one of the enablers of a circular economy is collaboration and sharing of information. And we want to do so amongst all of the stakeholders that make up ecosystems. And so really important that we have a diversity of type of members. And we're very blessed with an excellent representation from right across the country. Next slide, please. So how do you get involved? Look at membership if you can. There's a lot of information to go on our website. If not, you can certainly call out to any of the members of our organization. And you know, our members really work cross-functionally, as I've mentioned. We have an excellent suite of very active members. They are involved in all of our projects. They help us form our policy positions. And really, in our role of dissemination of information, our members become very, very important in supporting that role as well. So if you haven't had the chance to consider membership, we invite you. Next slide. So I mentioned early on that this work is really seminal for the Canadian Standards Association Group, and we have enjoyed a relationship with them for decades now, supporting many of the important standards that they develop and introduce into the marketplace that support circularity. And they have been top tier sponsors of many of our projects and programs, and so it's really a true collaboration. And we do, when we can, provide technical and market-based expertise by participating in many of their technical committees to help shape and inform a variety of the different standards that they bring to the marketplace. So we're very proud of our collaboration and partnership with them. So why is CIC in particular wanting to dive into this important subject matter? How does it relate to our role in accelerating circularity around food, but circular economy in Canada in a broader context? Just some impressive numbers here. Of course, Canada's agriculture sector, incredibly important to them in terms of its GDP contributions, and we're very much known as a global leader. So if you didn't know, spanning 62 million hectares of vast farmland from coast to coast to coast. So of course, you know, one of our biggest economic drivers. In 2024 alone, the food system contributed $149.2 billion dollars worth of the country's GDP and employed over 2 million people. But that comes with its impacts, particularly in some of the practices that are apparent today, contributing to somewhere between 8 and 10% of the country's total emissions. And so an important sector for us to look at reducing those environmental impacts and looking for ways to build resiliency in the sector as well. And of note, the food sector is critical to Canada's circular economy as it encompasses a staggering $58 billion in annual avoidable food waste. So that's really focused on end-of-life management. But over half of that, actually, that loss occurs in the production and manufacturing cycle. And that's why thinking about a different way of agriculture is important as we try to tackle that important portion. So we know from shifting from a linear take, make, dispose model towards a more holistic one that it really encompasses regenerative agriculture practices that the sector can and should reduce waste and its carbon emissions across all of its value chain. And by doing so, certainly enhance our food security, improve soil health as a byproduct, and strengthen those ever more important supply chains. So this is why this sector is really a top of mind to us as an organization, and why we would host informational sessions like this to bring these issues top of mind and to work with these important ecosystem players to support more regenerative agriculture practices. So, what are the webinar objectives for us today? What are we going to cover? These are the three areas that we've sort of used as a framework to inform this webinar. What is regenerative agriculture? It's a term that does get thrown around, and I think that's really part of why we want to support standardized practices and standardized frameworks in order for us to have a common vernacular and a common understanding in terms of what does it mean to be a regenerative agriculture practice, what are the benefits and how is it different from traditional farming or farming as we know it today. So we're going to sort of set some level playing field in terms of understanding and information. We're going to definitely learn about CSA's research and the impact it's having already on regenerative agriculture and what this new research and finally the standard when it gets applied to the market hopes to do, and then why a standard is actually needed and why will it help in general accelerate circularity in the sector. So that's what we hope to cover in this very short 90 minutes. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Catherine Tays, who's the Manager of Strategic Initiatives for Emerging Programs at CSA. Thank you, Catherine.
Here we go, figuring out my screen share. Hopefully that is coming up for everyone.
Yes, we can see it well. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, so thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak to everyone today. We're really excited about being in this area and having a chance to potentially do some good here. What I would like to start with is just a brief discussion of who we are, what is CSA, and kind of set that understanding for everyone. And really the mission of CSA Group as an organization is to enhance the lives of Canadians through the advancement of standards in the public and private sectors. We often get asked, what is a standard? And in a nutshell, standards are documents that provide minimum requirements for the use, safety, performance, or design of products and services. Now, often, for those who aren't familiar with us, we often do get recognized for our certification mark on things like hockey helmets, electrical, plumbing, and other things that you might have around your home. But for those who are maybe not so familiar with us, we are actually a not-for-profit, member-based organization. We were established in 1919, and that testing, inspection, and certification is only one half of what we do. We actually are two organizations. One of them that I'm speaking to you today from is the Standards Organization. As a standards organization, we are accredited in Canada and the US, and we are Canada's largest standards organization. So we've been in operation for over 100 years, and we do operate now in 14 different program areas, including agriculture and agri-food, all the way through to construction, electrical, health and safety, many more. But our central focus of standards development really relies on our 11,000 plus members who are volunteers and who serve as experts on our over 1,000 committees. Those 1,000 committees are tasked with developing and maintaining our over 3,000 standards, again, based on our accredited consensus-based process. And really, that is what makes standard a particularly valuable tool for any sector. Standards are recognized benchmarks that can be used to demonstrate good practice. So whether it's for an established process or supporting innovation and demonstrating efficacy of new technologies in new areas. Standards provide consistency, clarity, and transparency, which reduces risk and uncertainty for organizations working with them. We have had a major focus as well on circular economy in the last years. And when we're thinking about circular economy, we really do recognize that changes are being implemented across the entire value chain. And these aspects of quality, performance, consistency, clarity, these are all critical in enabling organizations to develop new business models to meet that circular economy standard. And really, this is where we think that we can play an important role in helping support Canada. While standards development is an important pillar within CSA, we also have additional areas of focus, including our research arm, which is to provide evidence-based content and direction for our standards. We also have an education offering to support appropriate and accurate use of the standards that we produce, as well as advocacy to get the word out and support uptake for our standards. So shifting focus to today's topic, which is regenerative agriculture, I'm actually going to focus on one of those pieces from our research arm that I just introduced, because we really started our work in this area with a landscape review to identify challenges, opportunities, and really where standards can help provide support in this new area or this growing area. And so I'll begin with some quick context and background for what is regenerative agriculture and what really prompted us to start investigating it. I feel, some folks in this area, in this call, might be from more the circular economy side of things. So we'll just take a moment to make sure everyone is kind of clear on the general concept. Following my presentation, Sadaf will be diving more into this and discussing more of the details, but to provide a quick overview. And as Joanne already introduced, we know that food production is associated with a high amount of global greenhouse gas emissions, but the need for food is only growing. Unfortunately, soil health to produce that food is declining significantly across Canada and across the world. And so regenerative agriculture, we really started investigating as a potential solution or avenue to help address sustainability and improve circularity within the agri-food sector. And there are variable definitions that, again, I'll leave to Sadaf to get into the details of. But generally speaking, we can approach regenerative agriculture as an alternative means of producing food that can have lower or even net positive environmental or social impacts that are intended to support improving soil health. And really, this has been an emerging focus for producers and processors alike in recent years. So in our research, we wanted to ask, again, what are some of the barriers and opportunities? And I'll start with some of the barriers that we identified in our research. All of these are explained in much more detail in the research report, which is freely available. So I do encourage folks to take a look there if you'd like to have a more thorough discussion. But some of the barriers that we've encountered in our research for advancing regen ag in Canada, operational and biophysical limitations do exist. So these can be items that influence how the farm is managed or other regional limitations that are imposed by the soil type of the farm, the climate at that farm, for instance, other factors that are immutable and true for the location. There are also knowledge and support barriers, and these can include concerns around the lack of technical support when adopting regen ag, the perceived complexity of the practices, and just generally limited availability of knowledge resource or context-specific trial data that can be pointed to as an example. Financial barriers is another one that came up in our research. There are concerns around the cost of these practices towards accessing financing or the administrative burden of even existing incentive programs, let alone additional ones. Some of these concerns also include around the transition period when implementing regenerative practices from perhaps more traditional ag practices. And these can be exacerbated by factors like crop insurance or market conditions. And then finally, one of the important barriers that our research raised was social and cultural barriers. And these can be concerns related to the difficulty around mental shifts, social acceptance of these practices, lack of perceived support from agribusiness, and just the general difficulty with changing long established norms. So that's some of the barriers that we identified, but there are also enabling conditions that can be pursued to help support regen ag in Canada. And one of these most important ones that was raised was peer-based networks and communities of practice, creating a sense of community to shift cultural norms around regen ag and to promote the sharing of new farm perspectives. Another key critical piece is knowledge resources, skill development, and technical support to support the availability of these resources to promote this knowledge sharing that allows the practices to grow from farm to farm. Financing tools and addressing unintended consequences is another enabling condition. This could look like new financing programs, loans, or other financial incentives to those adopting regen practices. And this can help manage the transitional and adoption risks of shifting farm types. And then finally, outcomes-based programming and associated monitoring, reporting, and verification processes. So supporting regen ag by shifting to outcomes-based recognition or payment for ecosystem service style programming. And this would really rely on an appropriate set of these MRV tools in place to recognize the benefits and create those strong value propositions that entice investments. So as a standards organization, we always like to put a standards lens on the research that we do. And so we always ask the question of, where is there opportunity to provide better support and clarity through standards tools? And what are the particular gaps that we've identified? So the first gap, the first major gap that we identified is the lack of defined terminology and scope. The lack of a standardized definition and defined principles for regen ag has consistently been noted as a barrier to farm level adoption, to accessing capital, and to creating a demand driver, communicating the benefits of this practice change to the entire value chain, to governments, and to end users like consumers, for instance. Now, there is general agreement around core soil health principles, as I mentioned when I introduced the topic. But some are coming to understand the term in a more holistic way that includes economic and social considerations. Lack of defined metrics is another standardization gap that we identified through our work. Even with appropriate terminology and a clear scope, we can encounter challenges when reconciling how different programs implement and measure the outcomes of each principle. So there's a question of how to ensure rigor across different implementations of the same principle. There's differences that emerge, for instance, with looking at outcomes-based or practice-based approach to program verification. This can have implications on the type of processes that are needed for measuring and reporting and verification. There are a significant number of principles and practices under this umbrella of regen, and it would be a significant undertaking to develop standards for each single one. But we do think that that's where standards can play a role in supporting that rigor to set out what those processes are and even potentially identify necessary minimum requirements. And this is really important to limit greenwashing and inconsistent reporting. And then continuous improvement approaches. This would be an important gap that standards could help fill. What we heard is that farmers perceive regenerative agriculture as a journey of continuous improvement over time, and that the flexibility to try new things and to implement principles in different ways is vital. This has very important implications, of course, for how a standard must be developed. So a standard that supports that continuous improvement is a good option because it promotes positive change over time, but it also allows individuals to participate regardless of their starting point or where they're currently at in their journey. So we can reflect and support the farmer's own priorities and own realities in their own farm. So what is our intention? Our intention with standardization is really to provide a tool or document that can be used to support regenerative agriculture claims. We believe that a common definition of regenerative agriculture can support improved recognition of practices and outcomes by supporting the claims of regenerative producers. Flexibility is possible through standards, and this is an important point that I like to remind folks. there can be varying levels of guidance or strengths of requirements that are part of the text of the standard itself. There is also flexibility in how a standard can be used. So, for instance, with different types of claims, like seen on this slide here, first party claims, for instance, are more like self assessments, which can be made by the farmer according to the standard. Second party attestations are also possible, and this is a declaration of conformity by a related or hired organization. There's also third party certifications, which is an independent third party assessing, and usually this is an accreditation step that is required for that. I really want to emphasize that all are valid mediums for recognition and with appropriate use cases. So, what specifically are we working on now with that understanding? Well, what we heard is that consistency is desired and the time to act is now. And our goal is to work towards greater standardization or certification as a means of accessing capital, creating a demand driver, and communicating the benefits to value chain and end users. And these are the two main areas of potential for immediate standard support: terminology and certification. So, with terminology, to establish that common understanding, to avoid greenwashing, and to outline expected impacts. With certification, really focusing in on that continuous improvement model that I had introduced, really looking at some kind of certification that meets farmers where they are and also provides meaningful direction on what steps to consider. And I think one of the final questions that I'll close off with is, why a national standard of Canada? Why is this the route that we've identified to proceed with? National standards of Canada are consensus based and they are Canadian led. So, really, the strength here is to make sure that the voices of the whole sector are included in making this determination and really making use of our accredited system to present a trusted tool that is, familiar and updated regularly and can be pointed to by really any member of the value chain. The important thing here is to find common ground between all of the various definitions and certifications that exist and help find consensus on these positions. We are very happy to be moving forward on this piece with the support of Farm Credit Canada. And I will now be passing things along to Sadaf to dig a little bit more into the scope and to provide some direction on where the standard is going for some of these pieces. I'm happy to be contacted if there's questions here or later, and I will pass things over to Sadaf.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. Hello, everyone. I am Sadaf, and I work as Director of Strategic Partnerships at Building Sustainable Value Center at Ivy Business School, Western University. Excited to be here. I'm working very closely with Yuri to develop a seed document on regenerative form of agricultural standards, which will feed into the standard development process. And today, I'm going to take you through the process which we have, or the logic which we have taken to develop this seed document and touch on some of the content of the seed document. For sure, we cannot go through all the content, but we'll touch upon some of it. So I'll start my presentation with, why does standardization matter? Catherine talked about it a little bit, but we all know in this room as well, regenerative agriculture is gaining momentum, but there's this absence of shared definition, consistent indicators, and credible verification evaluation framework that creates fragmentation across the system. And across the system means not only farming systems, it's also other value chain actors which are affected by the lack of standardization. And even, as I said, even in this room, our understanding of regenerative agriculture is a lot different and it varies from person to person. So standardization is important, and standardization would help different sectors. For example, in the farming system, it will reduce fragmentation. It would offer shared language to the producers, help producers pool data and language to improve efficacy, and support consistent data collection and benchmarking, which will help them improve continuously and along the journey of adopting regenerative agricultural practices. From the procurement and markets lens, it will create trusted signals. So um, the standards would offer price guarantees and long-term contracts for the producers, um, given by the procurement and market actors. Market actors will also be able to offer premiums based on the verified performance, which will be defined and identified through the standardization of the regenerative agriculture practices and outcomes. And then the standardization will allow pathways and transparency for ecosystem service payments as well from procurement and markets lens. Another thing which was highlighted in Catherine's presentation was about financial services or financial actors. For financial actors, standardization would reduce uncertainty, providing that would help financial actors to provide financing at a discounted rate because we will have shared understanding of regenerative agriculture, which will mean that uncertainty will be reduced, and they would see financial actors would see it as low risk investment, and then they will be able to provide financing at a discounted interest rate. It would also unlock patient capital for infrastructural investment, which is an important investment in agricultural sector, and that will be aligned with the transition timelines. And we all know that for regenerative agriculture transitions, the timeline is a little bit slow. And I'll come to that in my next slide, which is based on research which has already been conducted by Deloitte. And then it would also offer discounted insurance premiums for the producers. For the public policy, it will enable targeted incentives, which means that public policy actors would be able to to give innovative grants or evidence-based funding because the standardization process will allow that. And then standardization would also help these actors provide tax credits with verified outcomes because standardization would help that. Now, this is the research I was talking about. This has been conducted by Deloitte in Europe. They have conducted this analysis of the costs and incentives for regenerative agricultural transitions. And I'll be quick, it's a little bit technical, but the light green line you see over here talks about financing needs of the transition when the farms are transitioning to adopting regenerative agricultural practices. And then the dark green line here shows the cumulative benefits of regenerative agricultural transitions. And this is with incentives when they have additional financing coming from investors or other sources. So with incentives, the benefits and financing which is needed, that gap is a little bit less as compared to benefits which are without incentives, which is the financing gap or financing needs are higher. In any way, the financing needs are higher when transitioning to the regenerative agricultural practices in the beginning of the transition. And however, when with incentives, the payback happens after 9 years. But without incentives, payback doesn't happen even after 10 years, which means incentives are important. Incentives from investors or additional financing, which would support this transition. So this is from financial lens, but I would also want to highlight a quote which is extracted from our upcoming report, which is in our pipeline at Ivy's Center of Business Sustainable Building Sustainable Value, and this is the farmer's perspective, and and I would highlight it as a procurement perspective because according to this farmer, he said that it would be great if we could be paid for our best management practices. In this context, regenerative agricultural practices on the farm, but the price of our commodities are the same regardless of the practices used. This is because they're not offered premium based on the implementation of regenerative agricultural practices because there's no standardization. So that's why standardization is important, and this has to happen. Now, why Canada needs standards for regenerative forms of agriculture? When we were developing this document, we started thinking about this. And then we defined the criteria to develop this seed document. And there are four different criteria which we use to develop the seed document. First is context specificity, where regeneration is not a prescription. It is contextually intelligent response. So this standard tries to adapt recommendations and metrics to specific contexts, which is soils, climate, farm structure. Now, even within Canada, regenerative agriculture is very contextual. The soil type, climate, and farm structures are different in different regions of Canada as well. So it is important to develop Canadian specific standards, which is context specific. Another criteria was system integration of ecological, social, and economic consideration. Now, it is very important to understand that true regeneration cannot come at sustained cost of another part of nested system. So we need to take, this standard need to recognize ecological and social principles, outcomes, and practices together and highlight their mutualism and interdependency and that both these social and ecological principles, outcomes, and practices are interconnected with economic benefits as well. So the three considerations are integrated, which is ecological, social, and economic. And then the third criteria was fit for purpose. The cost and complexity of validation must not become a barrier or strain for farmers, readers. And this standard should be accessible, affordable, and scalable while avoiding excessive bureaucracy. This was an important aspect to consider while thinking about Canadian specific standards. And the last criteria was about agronomic enabling value, which means that primary value of farm data must flow back to the farmer. These standards provide practical, context-rich direction that directly support farm management and innovation. So the data is helpful for the farmers so that they can improve continuously. So this was the criteria. And then we discussed the goal of evaluation of regenerative forms of agriculture. The goal is not to define or measure a static regenerative state because it's not static. It's dynamic. And instead, the standard is built to define and support alternative continuous journeys of improvement. And we could kind of demonstrate it through the question we have posed here, and this will exemplify this perspective of journeys of improvement. So, for example, can a farm be regenerative while using herbicide? And the answer to this question is yes, to an extent. And if there are documented plans, observable practices, and outcomes indicating that the farm is on the regenerative journey, intending to continuously reduce synthetic harmful inputs to the soil. In this case, farm can still be regenerative, but the tier would vary or tier would be different. So with this goal, we have also considered our existing work and the literature which is existing in this agri-food space to develop the content of the standard and to come up with a definition of regenerative forms of agriculture. So according to our review and according to our work, we have come up with this definition of regenerative forms of agriculture, which is holistic approaches to agricultural production system that continually enhance the health, productivity, and resilience of interconnected social and ecological system. They prioritize measurable improvements in soil and plant health, animal welfare, agricultural biodiversity, water quality and conservation, and farm and community well-being and resilience. And these approaches are rooted in continual learning, cooperation, and adaptation amongst farmers. So this is the holistic definition of regenerative forms of agriculture. Now, regeneration is a journey, and we've been talking about this from the beginning of this presentation, which is this journey is context specific, and therefore, it is the journey towards context-specific outcomes. And those outcomes are guided by principles that inform the adoption of different practices, which are complementary in nature. And that's how we develop the content of this seed document, the core content. So first of all, I'll talk about the context-specific outcomes. So based on our review and literature which we had consulted, we came up with 3 categories of outcomes of regenerative forms of agriculture. The first category is soil and plant health, which means healthier soil with more organic carbon in general. Of course, there are multiple outcomes under that, and that would be available in the detailed seed document. But in general, it means healthier soil with more organic carbon, which could be determined through organic carbon in the soil through soil health testing. Another category is animal welfare, which is more about healthier livestock on the farm, which is usually determined through reduced involuntary culls and mortality rates of the animals. The third one is about native biodiversity. Now, native agricultural biodiversity is a segment of a broader biodiversity. Biodiversity is a broader concept, but native agricultural biodiversity is a segment of biodiversity, and that's what we considered under this category. And this category is more about growing native agricultural biodiversity above ground and below ground. Above ground means insects, pollinators, and wild animals. However, below ground, it means microbes, fungi, and invertebrates, including earthworms and other invertebrates as well. The fourth category is water quality and conservation. So if we implement regenerative agricultural practices, the outcomes would be cleaner water systems. And it could be tested through water quality indicators. There will be less runoff and sedimentation, and which means reduced erosion. And there would be improved water infiltration in the soil, which means soil will be able to absorb more water, but at the same time, soil will be able to retain more water as well, which will improve plant health. And then the fifth category is about climate change mitigation, and it's an important one. It is about reduction in net greenhouse gases. So it is more about carbon sources on the farm, but carbon emitted from the farm, but also about carbon stored through the regenerative agriculture practices. So reduction in net greenhouse gas emissions means carbon emitted subtracted from carbon stored through these practices. So the net emissions would reduce through these regenerative agricultural practices. And the last category is more social in nature, and it's about human and community well-being and resilience. And major outcomes associated with this category are safe working environment, which includes reducing health and safety incidents on the farm, but also stronger local food systems, which means focusing on locally sourced inputs like seeds, locally sourced seeds, or locally sourced fertilizers, and markets, local markets. So selling it out to the local markets, and it could be determined by mass or percentage if the produce being sold to the local market. Well, with these key outcomes, because they are informed by or they are guided by the key principles. The key principles, we have categorized key principles according to these 2 categories. So one category is ecological principles, which are mostly associated with soil, water, and biodiversity. And then there are social principles related to society, which are guiding the outcomes, which are health and safety and food sovereignty. So these are the key principles. I'm not going to go into the details of these principles, but as said, they guided the outcomes, and then these principles and um, inform the practices. And we came up with 24 key practices and put them in the seed document. One of the example, and then we have also aligned these practices with the key principles, which are guiding these practices, and outcomes, which would be the result of these practices if implemented properly. So for example, here you could see reduce or no tillage is guided by or aligned with these principles, which are minimizing soil disturbance, conserving and protecting water, keeping keeping live plants and living roots in the soil, and keeping soil covered year round. And then there are outcomes associated with these practices. If we implement these practices, we'll achieve these outcomes. So that's how we kind of organize practices with principles and outcomes. One of many examples of the practices which could be implemented, and I'll just go through it quickly. On the left-hand side, you could see the traditional beef production. On the right-hand side, you could see the regenerative protein production. Now, you could see in the traditional beef production, the production relies on external inputs like external seeds, pesticides, capex, land. So these are all external. And the process you could see is very linear. It's only one way. So we grow corn, or we save corn extra as hay, and then cows eat corn, and then the beef is produced as grown cows. So that's how traditional beef production is done. Now, in this system, being linear, the profitability depends on scaling and efficiency, and risk is minimized through chemicals and technology, as compared to minimizing it through the ecological process. On the right-hand side, you could see the regenerative protein production. Now, in this process, natural processes, so you could see from the beginning, natural processes are used to grow grass. And while cows graze on the grass is kept to a certain height, and then excess grass is stored as hay, so cows can eat that in winter. Now, when the cow graze, they're produced. The beef is produced on one end, but then chickens chickens scratch the manure, and then that manure get absorbed in the soil, which make the soil fertile, needing no fertilizer from outside, and then grow the grass again. So you could see the process here in the regenerative protein production is very circular. And this production system becomes ecosystem service rather than a commodity chain, which you could see from the traditional beef production. It is a commodity chain. So this is how practices are implemented, and this is just one of the examples. And we talk about meat production. Before I end my presentation, I also want to talk about the performance rating which we considered or we recommended in the seed document. We used to inform the design and calibration of this tiered structure, where bronze is the lowest, and then silver and gold and platinum. We used the standard straw on the European Alliance of Regenerative Agriculture's living benchmarking approach, where bronze, and you could see that approach here on the right-hand side. So from where bronze is at the sustainable level, here neutral, and platinum would be at the regenerative level. And we aligned our proposed framework according to this methodology. Now, each tier combines specific practices, and at the platinum level, demonstrated outcomes are also included, because we have already explained that regenerative agriculture is a journey. So and it is expected that if the farms will continually improve in this journey, they would lead to demonstrating some outcomes, and that's why those outcomes are included at the regenerative level, which is the platinum level. And then this tiered approach would reflect increasing levels of system maturity and performance. And I'll just give an example of bronze level. So for example, bronze level recognizes the consistent implementation of widely applicable practices that protect soil and water resources and create enabling conditions for long-term ecological and system resilience. So this is neutral and creates enabling conditions, and which is very basic for the regenerative for adopting the regenerative agricultural practices, and that's the sustainable baseline. So that's how we kind of organize different practices, and that will be in the seed document, which we hope to deliver soon, hopefully next week, to CSA. With this, I want to thank you, and we hope and with the hope that these standards would accelerate circular food systems in Canada. And I'll pass it back to Joanne.
Thank you, Sudaf. And to you, Catherine, as well. A whole ton of information delivered very quickly. So I appreciate these are not always simple concepts to try to get across in a 25-minute presentation between the two of you. So thanks for that. I am going to introduce in a couple of minutes our additional panelists that we want to add into this conversation. But before I do that, I see that we do have a slew of questions coming into the Q&A. So what I would like to do is ask Caitlin to unmic and maybe let's pick two for now. This doesn't mean that we won't address the other ones, but we've got time for two, I think, and then I'll go right into introducing our additional three panelists. Thanks. And I think just by way of facilitation, I can maybe decide between the two of you which one who wants to take what question. Thank.
Yes, we can go for the first one. I think maybe for Catherine. The lack of standardization is posited as the main barrier for a market for regenerative crops, but what is the evidence that there is a market demand for that particular claim?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person on the panel to address this, but I can start, and I'm sure everyone will jump in and correct me. But I think that we can only respond to what we hear. And part of our research was trying to connect with as many folks as we could to get all of those perspectives. So farmers, of course, as a key, party of this whole question, but also all the way through the value chain. So major companies, food processors, associations that represent consumers, retailers. So, our research is perhaps not quantified in a specific number, but it's based on what we heard from folks. And so really that is kind of where we're going for. I will say that I think, maybe I'll put McCain on the spot to comment on this later, but, as an actual producer of products, but while consumers' demand is one aspect and one potential benefit for having a regenerative standard, a regenerative certification, I don't think it's the only one, and maybe not the one that is perhaps most pressing. I think that there is a real need to respond to climate change and to having a more circular agri-food system. And a regen standard can, we think, help push that forward. And so I'll leave it at that for now and say I think that there's many aspects to it that other people are better positioned to speak to their own lived experience, for instance.
Great. Caitlin, maybe one more.
Yeah, one more maybe for Sadaf. The second one here. Why was local chosen as the primary component of a regenerative food system? Local is often mistakenly conflated with things that are more inherently important, like equity, parity, governance, and environmental impact.
So, well, thank you for the question. Very insightful. We think that, and it's proven through research that regenerative agriculture is very contextual. And I've explained it a little bit that we know that soil conditions, climate, and other conditions which are required for implementing regenerative agricultural practices and making them successful achieve certain outcomes which are associated with those practices. That depends on the conditions of the farm as well, which is soil and climate and management practices as well. So because of that, it is very important to contextualize it, and contextualizing it means that it's going to be local. Apart from that, another thing is that with during the last 1 year, we have realized that there are geopolitical risks associated with um, exports and imports. And if we make agriculture more local, that's going to reduce the geopolitical risks associated with our food, and which is important. We can live without other commodities. We cannot live without food. That's an important component. We live on it. So I think it's important to make food security a priority, and that's why it should be local. We should focus on local.
Thanks for that. So thanks, Caitlin, for helping us to handle those many questions. Please keep them coming. Use the Q&A. And I should have said from the onset that because we're tight in time, we might not verbally be able to get to them in our discussion today, but we will certainly make sure that all of our experts who have generously given time beyond this webinar help us give the responses to these in writing post-webinar as well. So that'll be made available to everybody if we can't grind through them all sort of live here. But with that, what I want to do is broaden the conversation. Really excited to get a reaction from three additional experts that come at regenerative agriculture from their own lens and their own position or place in the ecosystem or on the marketplace as well. So I'm going to introduce them, and then, or actually, maybe what I'll do is for simplicity's sake and to keep us rolling along, if I could ask you each to introduce yourselves. Tell us who you're representing here today, and maybe a comment or two in terms of, why regenerative agriculture and in particular a standard sort of matters in your work. With that, I think we should start with the farmer. Blaine, can you start us off?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Blaine Jurtis. I farm in Saskatchewan, and I'm outstanding in my field, so that's my number one thing. I've been farming for 50 years. In the last 30, I've been what I call a regenerative farmer. And I guess what I'm attempting to do is when my grandfather came onto the farm 111 years ago, we had 12% organic matter on that soil. And by the time I smartened up, we had it worked down to 2%. Since I've changed directions and started to farm regeneratively, we have now got the average soil organic matter back up to 6%. So that is an incredible change in 30 years is a relatively short time. So that's what I do. Also, I do that using cattle.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Blaine. I appreciate it. We heard a lot about demand in the market. So, Elizabeth, maybe I can ask you to introduce yourself in that context.
I appreciate it. So, Elizabeth Shepherd, I work for McCain Foods, as Catherine mentioned. And McCain Foods, we're speaking to a Canadian audience, so you'll probably recognize the name, but we're actually a global manufacturer of frozen French fries, the world's largest. We manufacture our French fries in various regions all over the world, but in North America, we've got 7 sourcing basins. So 3 of those are in Canada, New Brunswick, Manitoba, and Alberta. And all of the potatoes that are going into our French fries are procured directly from farmers. And so we have very close, long-standing personal relationships with those farmers. And over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years, we've really started to prioritize regenerative agriculture as a key pillar of our sustainability strategy. We've got our own framework, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And we've had a ton of learnings, I would say, in launching that framework and engaging growers with it. And we've got some really positive momentum. And it now feels like we're starting to see the fruits of that labor in celebrating all of the wins that the growers are having and building that path forward with a really strong emphasis on assuring supply, making sure that everything that we're working with our farmers on is sustainable for the land, is improving soil health, but is also sustainable for their bottom line, keeping return on investment top of mind for everything that we're working on.
Thanks for that. I'm going to be really keen to hear, and I'm sure others will as well, sort of how a standard may actually apply, given that you probably already have your supply chain requirements solidly in place. And I'm really keen to hear, given that you're a global buyer, what are the applications of a standard made in Canada across, your other growing areas as well. So really happy to have you here and have your perspective as well. And last but not least, Amar Adas from Farm Credit Canada, if you could introduce yourself and your role here. We heard a lot about de-risking financially and the stepped approach. That seems to be how the informing how the standard will take place, and unlocking, de-risking and unlocking finances as farmers move through this transition is going to be critical. So over to you.
Thank you, Joanne. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm Amar Adas. I'm the Senior Director for Sustainable Finance and Insights at FCC. I've been with the organization for 2 years now. And FCC, for those that haven't heard of it, is a financial crown corporation with a mandate to support Canadian agriculture. We're 100% invested in Canadian agriculture to support the sector, from agribusiness, which is pre-farm, primary producers, biggest part of our business, of course, to food processors. So both McCain and folks like Blaine are we have a symbiotic relationship with them. We are unique in being a bank that is 100% dedicated to one sector, which is agriculture in Canada. We're actually one of the biggest financial crowns. We have over $63 billion now of loans and equity investments in our book. And the reason that I'm here and that we're supporting regenerative agriculture, a producer like Blaine with 6% organic matter in his soil is a very good customer for us, because we know that he's going to be resilient. That land is going to be able to stand climate volatility and drought and different things that might hit that land versus another producer with lower carbon in the soil. And because we are so uniquely positioned within the sector, we're kind of a universal owner for agriculture, right? So the success of the sector is our success. And so we have a mandate to support through financial products, but also through advisory and through collaboration and other means. And I'll just finish by stating our sort of northern star that drives what we do every day, which is our winning aspiration is to be bold in making Canada a global leader in food security and sustainable food production by driving innovation, being a catalyst in value creation in the ecosystem, and enhancing Canada's brand abroad. I think if you dissect this sentence, every piece of it is today more relevant than even it was 2 years ago.
Really appreciate that, and you're quite right. The resiliency piece is ever more coming to the fore of this conversation, and so I think with that, if Sudaf has the ability to turn on her camera, I would ask her to do so, because what I want to do is just have an armchair kind of style chat with you all, and I think the cross pollination of information and experiences is going to be really rich for our listeners today. Blaine, I want to start with you, just, really practically, you've got 3 decades of experience and expertise, 3 decades to keep a farm alive, full stop. It's not easy. I come from Manitoba and I grew up on a farm, so I know exactly the trials and tribulations of that. And never mind to sort of go through the journey that you have in terms of regenerative practices, maybe before the term was even really socialized and understood. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, two things, how did you go from into a regenerative process, keep your profitability? And I guess the part B of that question would be, what are some of the benefits other than just, being profitable, that you've seen on your farm in particular versus the traditional practices that you've left behind?
Well, I guess people often ask me that question, where was the epiphany moment? And I don't know if I had one. I guess I was very privileged, and I grew up in a family that was probably more green than normal back in the 60s. And so I started feeding birds when I was 10 years old and still feed birds today. And I think that gave me powers of observation. When I started farming, I went along, I was trained industrial model farming, used technology to the nth degree. And it took me about 20 years to realize I was just running faster and faster on a squirrel cage and getting nowhere. And I also, because of my observation, I started to realize that my soil wasn't as healthy. I could tell that, after a hard rain, I'd see soil move. I'd see litter on the surface move. It didn't have that rich, pungent smell of the actinomycetes in it. And I started to ask myself, well, this can't continue on. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know the word regenerative yet at that point, but I had read stuff from Alan Savory in Zimbabwe, some of the work that he was doing. He's the founder of holistic management, which is a worldwide movement. And so I started seeding grass down back over 30 years ago now. To seed grass back on good grainland in Saskatchewan is a wee bit of an unheard of thing. It does create coffee shop talk. And never owned a cow in my life, and started to move cows around. And lo and behold, it didn't take very long before I realized that, hey, this is going to work. I could tell my land was improving. So what have I seen since? I sent my kids away to university. We didn't think any of them would ever come back. My oldest son, who was trained in biological sciences, he kind of observed this. He came back about 6 years later and said, Dad, could I farm here? Could I come and farm with you? That is phenomenal. That's not common. And I believe to this day that if we wouldn't have moved down the greener path, that wouldn't have happened. I have 2.5 times more production than what's happening in the neighborhood. We use zero inputs. The only input we get is sunshine. And so we manage that very carefully. We make sure we grow very tall grass to capture maximum amount of sunshine. We ration it out on daily moves so that we have grass. We graze probably 2 months longer than anyone else in the neighborhood, and with 2.5 times increased stock density, stocking rates, that makes us considerably more profitable.
Well, that speaks for itself. That speaks for itself. Halving your inputs and doubling your outputs, I think, is the right way to go for sure. But interesting that you're sort of stating some of the obvious, which maybe sometimes we really overlook. So back to the future, I guess, is the theme here, and really appreciate the intergenerational comment. I think that is rare, and I think people think micro farming when they think regenerative. I certainly did for a long time in my learning journey. It doesn't actually have to be a micro farm that can be generative. These larger farms that produce and are very profitable and important to our system, can adopt those practices along the way. Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about, you talked about a global marketplace for you but I'm assuming that you've got very strict or specific requirements that you would require for all of your suppliers irrespective of where they're farming. Can you talk a little bit about what those requirements might be? What informed them without having a standard in place, because you're ahead of the curve here. And then, how does that maybe dovetail into what would be defined as a regenerative agriculture practice?
Happy to do so. So when we think about, what is required and like what is a non-negotiable for having a contract with McCain, and keeping in mind the depth of our relationships with our farmers, that comes back to safety and quality. That's on-farm safety, food safety. So those are our, full stop non-negotiables. We collect quite a bit of data. We're on-farm present, checking those things. Our approach to regenerative is an optional approach. And so this is something where we're working very directly with our growers. We've got our agronomists on farm, working with them, helping them to understand what is our standard, looking at what are our priorities, what does this look like on your farm, what are the trials that we can collaborate on, how can we set up the infrastructure for you to do peer-to-peer learning, for us to de-risk region-specific trials for those priority areas. But we felt that it really was important to lead on regenerative with trust with our growers and not about mandates and cutting people out, because this is a big change on farm. And ultimately it comes down that the farmers own the risk. And so it wasn't something that we were coming down, with the hammer, do this or you're out. But we've had a lot of success with that. And it has been a journey since 2021 of actually launching the framework of kind of surpassing those social barriers, because there's definitely, rightfully so, skepticism. Is this going to be a fleeting interest? And I think that we've now, made enough progress that I feel our growers are with us, that they see how we're thinking about this as assured, sustained supply. This is just good business in order to be working with them. And it really is that holistic relationship as well. So we had a lot go into our framework when we thought about, pulling from experts like the Soil Health Institute. Our framework is aligned with SAI. We also got inputs from some trusted farmers as well. And what you'll see, I'll put a link to our framework in the chat, but we measure progress against 7 indicators. And like a lot of the other speakers, We are putting our growers on the framework with a tiered approach. So it's not really a you're in or you're out situation. And we're providing that information back to the growers of this is where we scored you by indicator on our framework, so that they understand, what's my go get, and they can work with their McCain agronomist on that, building out crop improvement plans and planning for the future.
Thanks for that detail. And I just a follow-up question before I move on. You talk about the farmers obviously taking on all the risk, which is just the blunt reality here. Is there an opportunity, and did McCain help share that risk in some way? Meaning, did they guarantee those farmers that are moving into regenerative practices some kind of pricing structure or purchasing structures so the farmers could feel some comfort as they made this, not knowing what the future is going to hold as they make the transition? Was there a risk sharing relationship that at all that you can speak about?
So we've done a number of different things in order to try to share that burden with farmers. One of the things that I'm really proud of is our partnership with Farm Credit Canada. It's relatively small, but I think we're going to year 4 of providing an effective interest rate rebate to growers that are engaged with regenerative agriculture. And we scale up our contribution to that program depending on how advanced they are. So again, kind of going to that carrot method of trying to make this appealing rather than the stick method of requirement. We've also spent a lot of time and resources on a program that we call innovation hubs. And so what those are partnerships that we have in each region with a farmer to select an area or principle of regenerative agriculture that they're interested in and that is perceived as a barrier for that region to advance in. And we collaborate with that grower on like a farm level trial where we're taking on all of the risk of that. And we're also inviting neighboring farmers on to a field day where we take them through everything that we're doing, the mid-season results, and then we do thorough report outs in our winter meetings with growers, in publications that we make available almost exclusively to our farmers. And so we really try to be, tactical about like how do we do this really well in a couple of specific areas where it's really required, where we can move the needle. And we've had a lot of success with that. We had over 70% of our grower base attend a field day at an innovation hub this year, which is pretty impressive. They come midsummer, so it's their busy time.
Sounds like it sounds like a real partnership, as opposed to, a commercial relationship. It sounds like a real partnership as well. So congratulations on that. Thanks for the detail. Amar, I want to talk about, your obviously you've been very, I think you've started out when you introduced yourself about sort of the size of the prize that you've set aside for this, the investment that FCC is preparing and increasing to sort of double down on regenerative practices in Canada. Can you maybe cast back a little bit and talk about how that's evolved over time, and maybe a sideline about how you might be different from sort of traditional financing, and how you're working again in partnership with farmers to unlock that financing?
Yeah, sure. So the number I mentioned was sort of the overall size of the FCC's book, right? So that's about 63 billion today. So that's the size of our balance sheet. From that, we have committed to $2 billion in sustainable financing explicitly over the next, we're near one now, so by 2030, so over the next 4 years. And that means the adoption of BMPs or beneficial management practices that are aligned with one of the 60 specific eligible activities in our sustainable finance framework, which is available public on our website. I'll put it in the chat here momentarily, put a link to it. And so, and all of these are designed to make the producer more resilient. And the partnerships that we have with McCain is an exemplary partner. They multiply our contribution, X number of times. So that's fantastic. We wish we could get more of that. In addition to the 2 billion that we've committed to sustainable financing, we also have committed to separately another $2 billion to investment in innovation and ag tech, essentially, to help stand up Canadian companies that are innovating, that are developing new technologies and new innovative solutions to address farmers and producers' needs. We also last week announced that we're crowding in $5 billion in addition from other partners. There's a long list. There was an announcement, a press release made last week by FCC, a long list of investors that are partnering with us also to invest in Canadian agriculture. So I've been saying for quite some time now, when agriculture is having a moment, and especially in Canada, the vast potential for this country and its capacity in agriculture. We compare so well in sustainability compared to other growers across the world. We have more efficient production. We have no-till across the board. And a lot of these practices are adopted by definition, right? They're not necessarily called sustainable or they're just common sense, farming practices. And in addition to the financial support, to your question, we also do provide advisory support. So we will heavily subsidize a customer, a producer that is looking to assess the management of their operation, both through a sustainability lens, but through just traditional business lens. We provide transition loans to help with passing on to the next generation and succession. We know that a lot of farmers will be retiring in the next 8 to 10 years, and we need to ensure that there are solutions available for a transition of the farm. And we're also explicitly launching a program in the new fiscal year that will address some of the challenges, the barriers to adoption, right? So what Blaine did is not easy, right? It's not easy for any producer to take on these changes and commit to them. So we want to provide patient capital. We want to provide flexible credit solutions that will support producers that are prepared to adopt regen practices, and of course having offtake agreements or having commitments from the buyer down the line is something that would certainly aid in that endeavor. And we did launch in December a new product that explicitly contains an interest rate incentive for investment in any of the activities that qualify within our sustainable finance framework.
I'm still adding up the numbers. We'll give a total of all of the funding envelope that you've rattled through. I appreciate that. Are you seeing a good intake, a good interest level, and hopefully growing?
So broadly speaking, for our SCIP, which is the Sustainable Capital Investment Program, which was launched in December, it's early days. We did pilot it earlier last year. We've hit our KPIs and exceeded them so far, and that's without any kind of explicit marketing or kind of external engagement. It's all been organic from our relationship managers. So yes, we're seeing quite a lot of interest, and again, because a lot of these just simply make business sense. And for us, we're never going to try to make the case for the adoption of any practice that does not have a clear positive ROI and that makes business sense, right? So it's ideally something that will allow the producer to mitigate and address risk and or increase yield or improve return, right? So Blaine mentioned something that was fascinating. He uses no inputs. He uses sunlight as input, right? That's incredible. Like that's really quite impressive. So it's very straightforward to say, if I'm adopting sustainable agriculture practices and specifically regen, which means I'm using less input, well, that's a straight down to my bottom line. My cost is lower, right? So it makes a lot of sense. So yes, we are seeing adoption for the Regen Act practices, in particular the project. We're going to be launching this in the next couple of months. So and we will be working with partners on the ground explicitly to provide agronomy support, to provide different intake channels and so on. So that's still in the works, and we talk next time. I'll tell you how the adoption's been, but we're very optimistic. Yeah.
We'll check in and get an update. Thanks for that. Glad to hear that you're oversubscribed. That's exactly what we want to hear. I'm going to pose a question to Catherine, but I just want to call out to Caitlin that maybe we'll go back to the Q&A. Time is running down quickly. It always does, but and I know that there's more coming in. So if you wouldn't mind sort of getting ready to voice another question. Catherine, there was a question that came actually pre-webinar from one of our delegates on the scope and the application of this standard beyond just sort of the traditional agriculture that you think about into things like greenhouses and aquaculture and those kinds of things. Were you envisioning that you would be building a standard for these other farming applications as well, or is that a TBD?
Yeah, I'd say it's more on the TBD. I think, the scope of the work that we have undertaken is large already. I think that there's so many things to capture. I would like to position this standard as one first foundational piece. We want to create a tool for clear communication. We want to create a reference that can help serve as that really powerful knowledge transfer tool. That's something that standards are really well positioned to do, is be that knowledge transfer. The knowledge that we transfer, is fundamentally, I think, helpful. But there is a limited scope that we can, probably achieve in any first outing. So we're always open to hearing, what people want. We never pursue a standard without having kind of clear support for that topic and for that need. So if there's need for those additional pieces to kind of become a bigger part of the conversation, yeah, happy to hear about that. But I would say for now, more on the TBD side for those additional pieces.
And I think, the continuous improvement or continuous journey of improvement, I think, Steph, as you've described it in your research, gives all of those sort of different tiered approach that you can take. So it's not all at once. And because farms like or buyers like McCain are also, overlaying that on a voluntary, it's these steps that folks can take along the journey before they become, fully regenerative. So I would imagine in all of those other farm applications, there are aspects of that that can be, if that's the way the standard is going to be built, that they can apply that fairly quickly and probably, really directly. Caitlin, how are we doing on the Q&A?
Yes, we have a few in here. I think I'll go with the first one that I think any of the panelists could touch on. So from Claude here, in addition to climate change mitigation, should continuous adaptation to changing climates be a key outcome of regenerative agriculture from a perspective of long-term sustainability?
All right.
So I can take this.
Thank you. Thanks, Sudha.
And I'll quickly touch on this. So, adaptive management is a part of, is one of the practices which is listed in the CE document, and it entails continuously adapting your management based on the ecological or social impacts on your farm. So, this is important, and that's why that has been included in the CE document.
Thank you for that. Caitlin, I think we might have time for one, maybe two more.
Sure. Go with this one. So what is the boundary to be considered by the definition and certification? Is it at the farm level or the food system level? Can you have a regenerative farm that is part of a degenerative food system and vice versa?
Hmm. Catherine Sudaf, who wants to tackle that one to the ground? Because I see Blaine probably has an opinion about that.
Yeah, I think an interesting philosophical question. I certainly think that we want to recognize the really strong efforts that are being made by farmers like Blaine, irrespective of the current state of the food system. I think that doesn't make it less important and impactful at the individual level. I'll pass things over to Blaine though, because I think you have a much more real take on this.
Well, I guess in my case, we're producing grass fat and beef, which if you look at nutrient profiles is incredibly good for our bodies. The phytonutrients in grass fat and beef will just blow your mind away. And yet it goes in basically into the commodity market. So the degenerative system, my beef is exactly the same by the time it gets to a grocery store. You can't tell the difference.
Hmm.
So the only way I can do that, and I think this is where the regenerative movement is moving, is we need to quit growing commodities and we need to become better marketers as farmers.
Right.
And we have to market directly to consumers. And maybe it's not necessarily me, but maybe there's a group of 8 or 10 or 20 of us, and we're starting to see this happen, that are aggregating different food products and selling directly to consumers in places like Winnipeg and Regina, Edmonton, and across the cities of Canada. And I think that's the way it's going to move. I think the days of commodity agriculture are rapidly disappearing.
Hmm. Fascinating. And I would imagine this is really the spirit of the standard soon to be, or perhaps might become a certification, so that you can actually communicate as easily and quickly as possible to consumers, whoever they might be, maybe individual, maybe corporate, that there is practices here that have been verified and they're easy to find. But it tells the story of the farm, not just the product or the commodity. And I think that's what you're trying to get at, Blaine, if I understood your comments. So it goes right back to the fundamentals of a circular economy, which is redefining value, and we can't state that enough. It really tells this story. It's not just at the product level. So really appreciate that lens as well. Okay, Caitlin, literally 3 minutes left before I thank everybody. Can we squeeze in one?
Yeah, I just saw this one pop up. I thought might be interesting to look at. So what considerations would microplastics in farm soils part of future regenerative agricultural standards?
Microplastics in synthetic fertilizers, microplastics in the way that we move product. Is that part of maybe it came up in the research, Sudaf, at all? Was that, I think you did have some pollution indicators or KPIs, yeah?
I guess we hope biology gets more active and eventually we'll get rid of it. I think that's all we can do, is that just encourage biological activity by growing more diverse green plants longer, get more
Right.
photosynthesis happening. That's what you can do.
Yeah, yeah. Is that a direct line to the biodiversity KPI that I saw on your wheel? Did I interpret that correctly?
So one of the principles is to reduce the synthetic inputs. So efficient input use and reducing the synthetic inputs in the soil. So perhaps that relates to not only biodiversity, but also reducing the chemicals or the bad stuff like plastics going into the soil as well. So yeah, the principle addresses this aspect.
Multiple benefits. Okay, I think we're at time. Any last words or things that are just burning and folks want to get out before we thank and close? Happy to open it up.
I'm
And,
just
and
happy to answer any questions if anybody wants. I haven't read all the questions in the chat, but happy to answer afterwards.
So I think when we send out the recording and the presentations, we are going to send the emails, if we can, from each of the speakers as well, so that our attendees can get in touch with you directly. That's part of what we do as a collaborating organization. So happy to do that with your permission. And with that, a huge thank you to CSA for not only the work, but of course, sponsoring this webinar and other works of CIC and enabling us to be able to get this information out, and to Sudaf and the work that you're doing at Ivy to underpin and give us the sort of baselining facts and research that we need to move forward with this. I think, Catherine, as I understand it, there is a mechanism for folks that still want to get involved in the standard development, because you're at the starting point of that. Do you want to maybe voice that before I close?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are what we call the pre-committee phase. So we are pulling together our experts that will be sitting around the table and defining the content of the standard. So if there's any interest in being hands-on, holding the pen, please feel free to reach out. If you would simply like to participate in a kind of critique and providing suggestions sort of forum, we always have public review of all of our standards where anyone and everyone is welcome to review, provide comments, and every single comment that we receive is always reviewed in full by our technical committee for inclusion into the standard and development. So there's multiple routes. If there's more information that anyone wants on any of that, please feel free to reach out at any time, and I'm happy to chat.
Thanks very much for that. With that, Blaine, Elizabeth, and Mara, thanks so much for being part of the conversation today. It's really important for us to do a gut check with those of you who are actually may contemplate using this standard when it comes out. So thanks for that and all of your expertise and experience. And of course, Catherine, Sudaf, thanks as well for the presentations. For those of you who want to know more about CIC and our work, please do and get in touch with Caitlin and I, and we're more than happy to tell you about our continuing work in regenerative agriculture and food systems and the other verticals of work and sectors that we we advance circularity within. And with that, I'll say go Canada. I don't know what the women's score is, does anyone know? Can you get a reference or put it in the Q&A? I haven't seen it yet, but I hope we're winning at this point. But we'll say go Canada. Thanks very much to everybody. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.